Fallout. Chapter 4. Rebirth. Han opened the Jeep and Sparky ran out and into my arms. He tackled me as Andy just stood above us, chuckling. "Who's a good boy? You are. Yes, you are." Sparky was dancing and whining while excitedly barking. And Andy kneeled down to pet Sparky, and Sparky finally turned his attention to Andy as I got up and brushed myself off. So now what? Gordon looked at the landscape and buildings, which were slightly burning and smoldering still. Well, we need to get all the fires out. Han already deployed the firefighters and the EMTs. So far, about 500 people were killed, we've discovered, and the numbers are still rising. Then after that, we need to start rebuilding and come up with another strategy to fight Atmos. We all nodded, and I just sighed deeply. This is going to be difficult to come back from. Han then put her hand on my shoulder. But we're going to do it, because we ultimately don't have a choice. Failure is not an option. So Seb, you and I will go check the hospital, and Gordon, you focus on gathering a military, as we can no longer just rely on ourselves. And Andy, you focus on checking the power and making sure we aren't struck by any surprises. Gordon nodded, and he and Andy took Sparky and walked towards the Jeep as Han and I walked the streets. There were people outside their homes just looking around. Some of the roads had bodies in them, and people were crying over the bodies, and overall it was just a sense of shock. I stopped by a mother screaming over a child who was bleeding on the ground. Took a look at the child and ripped my shirt and tied it around his bleeding abdomen. "Ma'am, my name is Seb and I'm a doctor. Please let me take him to Sacramento General." She nodded as I held him. His eyes were fluttering open and shut, so time was of the essence. Han asked the mother her name. "I'm Denise, and this is Tim, my son. Do you think you can save him, Seb?" I nodded. "Yes, I can, but we have to hurry. I've managed to slow but not stop the bleeding." We rushed towards the hospital, and little Timmy was going to make it. The hospital, thankfully, was mostly spared from the bombing run from Atmos, and we rushed inside the glass sliding doors. There was really nobody inside the main lobby, so I rushed into an operating room. "Han, keep Denise company. I'm going to operate now." Denise and Han stayed in the lobby as I placed Timmy on the table. An hour later, I was done, and he was stabilized and on an IV drip. I walked out after washing my hands and saw Denise and Han sitting in the waiting room. "He made it, by the way, Denise." Denise rushed into my arms and thanked me for saving her son. "His father was killed in the bombing, so he's all I have left." I nodded and hugged Denise back. Han walked up to hug Denise after, and she then went to go visit her son. "Timmy should wake up soon." Denise nodded and went back to sit in the waiting room. Han and I walked around the hospital for a bit and noticed how some lights were out and some things were shaking around, but overall, it was relatively okay. "Seb, what do we do now?" I immediately thought of the logistics of rebuilding. Get as many construction workers as you can after all the fires are out, and just have people start rebuilding. Han nodded and took out a piece of paper and started to write. "Anything else you can think of?" I had to think for a second. "No. As long as Andy and Gordon are successful, then we should be good." We rushed back out of the hospital and back to the manor, which had thankfully been spared. Han opened the door to the manor, and she immediately opened the window and lit up a cigarette. "Mind if I have a drink, Han?" She nodded, so I poured it myself and gave myself plenty of rum. I nursed the glass for a solid 15 minutes while pacing around the manor's living room. Han walked over with a Cuban and handed it to me. "This one is rolled with a layer of weed in the middle. Enjoy." I smiled and lit it up as I put my empty glass down. Just then, Andy walked into the manor. The power is fully back, after some slight tweaking. He had a cigarette in his mouth and walked over to me and gave me a tight hug. "Hey, honey, how was your day?" Andy kissed the top of my head and squeezed my hand. "It was good. Had some difficulty with the power grid, but it's all set and fixed now. What did you get up to?" I gave Andy the weed-laced Cuban and he hit it. "I saved a little kid's life. It was an act of defiance against the desire to give up." He smiled. "Good. I'm glad. I wonder how Gordon is doing. Then I heard something in the sky, and it sounded like planes. Shit, here we go again. Everyone duck! Andy ducked as well as me, but Han stood up. Han, get down! Andy yelled, but she pointed out the window. Look how they aren't dropping any bombs. I think that's Gordon and the Air Force. Andy and I got up and we walked outside, and then we heard and felt rumbling and saw tanks on the road coming up the hills. I just stood there shocked. Andy laughed while Han smiled. Gordon was driving a jeep ahead of the tanks. He saw us and sped up, getting to the manor in record time. The jeep stopped and Gordon got out of the driver's seat. Seems that people wanted to join the military as their homes and lives were just bombed. But nobody under 18. No kids were allowed to join. Got to protect the innocent. I nodded and Andy pulled out his phone and shut the power off for a minute, just letting the jets and tanks roll into the Milky Way. It was a surreal image, but one I'd never forget. Then Andy turned the lights back on and the Milky Way became somewhat obscured by the lights. Just thought everyone should see the beauty of the universe as a little morale boost. I hugged Andy as Gordon and Han watched the planes and tanks fly and roll by. My God, we might actually have a chance.